Alright, guys, let's read one more chapter. Chapter 7. If you don't know, come to learn. If you know, come to teach. A little quote. Motto on invitations to National DA's Convention in Vegas, April 25th through 29, 1971. The first session, the opening remarks, lasted most of the afternoon. We sat patiently through the first 2 hours, although it was clear from the start that we weren't going to learn anything, and it was equally clear that we'd be crazy to try any teaching. It was easy enough to sit there with a head full of mescaline and listen to hour after hour of irrelevant gibberish. There was certainly no risk involved. These poor bastards didn't know mescaline from macaroni. I suspect we could have done the whole thing on acid, except for some of the people. There were faces and bodies in that group who would have been absolutely unendurable on acid. The sight of a 344-pound police chief from Waco, Texas, necking openly with his 290-pound wife, or whatever woman he had with him when the lights were turned off for a dope film, was just barely tolerable on mescaline, which is mainly a sensual surface drug that exaggerates reality instead of altering it, but with a head full of acid. The sight of two fantastically obese human beings far gone in a public grope, while 1,000 cops all around them watched a movie about the dangers of marijuana, would not be emotionally acceptable. The brain would reject it. The medulla would attempt to close itself off from signals it was getting from the frontal lobes, and the middle brain, meanwhile, would be trying desperately to put a different interpretation on the scene before passing it back to the medulla and the risk of physical action. Acid is a relatively complex drug, and its effects, while mescaline is pretty simple and straightforward. But in a scene like this, the difference was academic. There was simply no call at this conference for anything but a massive consumption of downers, reds, grass, and booze, because the whole program had apparently been set up by people who had been in a seconal stupor since 1964. Here were more than 1,000 top-level cops telling each other, we must come to terms with the drug culture, but they had no idea where to start. They couldn't even find the goddamn thing. There were rumors in the hallways that maybe the mafia was behind it, or perhaps the Beatles. At one point, somebody in the audience asked Bloomquist if he thought Margaret Mead's strange behavior of late might possibly be explained by a private marijuana addiction. I really don't know, Bloomquist replied, but at her age, if she did smoke grass, she'd have one hell of a trip. The audience roared with laughter at this remark. My attorney leaned over to whisper that he was leaving. I'll be down in the casino, he said. I know a hell of a lot of better ways to waste my time than listening to this bullshit. He stood up, knocking his ashtray off the arm of his chair, and plunged down the aisle toward the door. The seats were not arranged for random movement. People tried to make a path for him, but there was no room to move. Watch yourself, somebody shouted as he bowled over them. Fuck you, he snarled. Down in front, somebody else yelled. By now he was almost to the door. Have to get out, he shouted. I don't belong here. Good riddance, said a voice. He paused, looking around, then he seemed to think better of it and kept moving. By the time he got to the exit, the whole rear of the room was in turmoil. Even Bloomquist, far up front on the stage, seemed aware of a distant trouble. He stopped talking and peered nervously in the direction of the noise. Probably he thought a brawl had erupted, maybe a racial conflict of some kind, something that couldn't be helped. I stood up and plunged toward the door. It seemed like as good a time as any to flee. Pardon me, I feel sick, I said to the first leg I stepped on. It jerked back, and I said it again. Sorry, I'm about to be sick. Sorry, sick. Beg pardon, yes, feeling sick. This time a path opened very nicely, not a word of protest. Hands actually helped me along. They feared I was about to vomit, and nobody wanted it, at least not on them. I made it to the door in about 45 seconds. My attorney was downstairs at the bar talking to a sporty-looking cop about 40 whose plastic name tag said he was the DA from some place in Georgia. I'm a whiskey man, myself, he was saying. We don't have much problem with drugs down where I come from. You will, said my attorney. One of these nights you'll wake up and find a junkie tearing your bedroom apart. Nah, said the Georgia man, not down in my parts. I joined them and ordered a tall glass of rum with ice. You're another one of these California boys, you said. Your friend here's been telling me about dope fiends. They're everywhere, I said. Nobody's safe, and sure as hell not in the South. They like the warm weather. They work in pairs, said my attorney, sometimes in gangs. They'll climb right into your bedroom and sit on your chest with big Bowie knives. He nodded solemnly. They might even sit on your wife's chest, put the blade right down on her throat. Jesus God Almighty, said the Southerner. What the hell's going on in this country? You never believe it, said my attorney. In L.A., it's out of control. First it was drugs, now it's witchcraft. Witchcraft? Shit, you can't mean it. Read the newspapers, I said. Man, you don't know trouble until you have to face down a bunch of these addicts gone crazy for human sacrifice. Nah, he said, that's science fiction stuff. Not where we operate, said my attorney. Hell, in Malibu alone, these goddamn Satan worshippers kill 6 or 8 people every day. He paused to sip his drink. And all they want is the blood, he continued. They'll take people right off the street if they have to. He nodded. Hell yes, just the other day we had a case where they grabbed a girl right out of a McDonald's hamburger stand. She was a waitress, about 16 years old, with a lot of people watching too. What happened, said our friend. What did they do to her? He seemed very agitated by what he was hearing. Do, said my attorney. Jesus Christ, man, they chopped her goddamn head off right there in the parking lot. They cut all kinds of holes in her and sucked out the blood. God almighty, the Georgia man exclaimed. And nobody did anything? What could they do? I said. The guy who took the head was about 6'7" and maybe 300 pounds. He was packing 2 Lugers and the others had M16s. They were all veterans. The big guy used to be a major in the Marines, said my attorney. We know where he lives, but we can't get near the house. Nah, our friend shouted, not a major. He wanted the pineal gland, I said. That's how he got so big. When he quit the Marines, he was just a little guy. Oh my God, said our friend. That's horrible. It happens every day, said my attorney. Usually it's whole families. During the night, most of them don't even wake up until they feel their heads going. And then, of course, it's too late. The bartender had stopped to listen. I'd been watching him. His expression was not calm. 3 more rums, I said, with plenty of ice, and maybe a handful of lime chunks. Before I go on, this is a fucking picture that was drawn. It's another man, right? Maybe? Some crazy fuck outside the door. It says, bad craziness. So, the bartender had stopped to listen. I'd been watching him. His expression was not calm. 3 more rums, I said, with plenty of ice and maybe a handful of lime chunks. He nodded, but I could see that his mind was not on his work. He was staring at our name tags. Are you guys with that police convention upstairs? He said finally. We sure are, my friend, said the Georgia man with a big smile. The bartender shook his head sadly. I thought so, he said. I never heard that kind of talk at this bar before. Jesus Christ, how do you guys stand that kind of work? My attorney smiled at him. We like it, he said. It's groovy. The bartender drew back. His face was a mask of repugnance. What's wrong with you? I said. Hell, somebody has to do it. He stared at me for a moment, then turned away. Hurry up with those drinks, said my attorney. We're thirsty. He laughed and rolled his eyes as the bartender glanced back at him. Only 2 rums, he said. Make mine a Bloody Mary. The bartender seemed to stiffen, but our Georgia friend didn't notice. His mind was somewhere else. Hell, I really hate to hear this, he said quietly, because everything that happens in California seems to get down our way sooner or later, mostly Atlanta, but I guess that was back when the goddamn bastards were peaceful. It used to be all that we had to do was to keep them under surveillance. They didn't roam around much, he shrugged, but now, Jesus, nobody's safe. They could turn up anywhere. You're right, said my attorney. We learned that in California. You remember where Manson turned up, don't you? Right out in the middle of Death Valley. He had a whole army of sex fiends out there. We only got our hands on a few. Most of the crew got away, just ran off across the sand dunes like big lizards, and every one of them stark naked except for the weapons. They'll turn up somewhere pretty soon, I said, and let's hope we'll be ready for them. The Georgia man whacked his fist on the bar. But we can't just lock ourselves in the house and be prisoners, he exclaimed. We don't even know who these people are. How do you recognize them? You can't, my attorney replied. The only way to do it is to take the bull by the horns, go to the mat with this scum. What do you mean by that, he asked. You know what I mean, said my attorney. We've done it before and we can damn well do it again. Cut their goddamn heads off, I said, every one of them. That's what we're doing in California. What? Sure, said my attorney. It's all in the QT, but everybody who matters is with us all the way down the line. Like it's all in the quiet. God, I had no idea it was that bad out there, said our friend. We keep it quiet, I said. It's not the kind of thing you'd want to talk about upstairs, for instance. Not with the press around. Our man agreed. Hell no, he said. We never hear the goddamn end of it. Dobermans don't talk, I said. What? Sometimes it's easier just to rip out the back straps, said my attorney. They'll fight like hell if you try to take the head without dogs. God almighty. We left him at the bar, swirling the ice in his drink and not smiling. He was worried about whether or not to tell his wife about it. She'd never understand, he muttered. You know how women are. I nodded. My attorney was already gone, scurrying through a maze of slot machines toward the front door. I said goodbye to our friend, warning him not to say anything about what we told him. I don't know how much he embellished this story, but that guy's an idiot.